Center in Addis Ababa, as well as to everyone who joins us online, live on Facebook. This is a great opportunity to talk about civic engagement. And I'll introduce our guest speaker in just a moment, but first I want to say a few words about why civic engagement is important for Ethiopia, particularly right now. So as you're all aware, Ethiopia is in the process of undergoing a political transition toward a more inclusive and open political system, as well as looking at economic reforms to empower people, entrepreneurship, unlock the country's potential. Now, all of this is not a foregone conclusion. There are challenges, and we all know about them. Everyone's aware that Ethiopia, through this transition, is facing some obstacles. And that's normal. Every country has challenges. The US has challenges. But the way we get over those challenges, the way we get past them, especially in a democracy, is by getting involved. And so I'll tell you a quick story about something that happened on our Twitter account not too long ago. We had a quote from Ambassador Rayner, about the tremendous opportunity that Ethiopia is facing right now. And we had one person respond saying, well, how are we supposed to wait for the opportunity to happen? Now, I don't think the person actually meant to ask a question, but we took it as one, and we said, you're not supposed to wait. You're supposed to help make it happen. You're supposed to help achieve this moment. You're supposed to make this moment come to fruition. And that takes Ethiopia. All challenges to take them on and find the path to the future that all Ethiopians deserve. So the United States Embassy, through our different programs and activities, is focused on supporting the capacity of all Ethiopian citizens to do just that, to get involved, to be a part of finding the solutions. And this is where we're so happy to have our guest speaker to talk about civic engagement. So I'm going to take a minute to introduce you to Brian MacHarg, who is the Director of Civic Engagement at the Appalachian State University, where he focuses on how civic participation can promote democratic values and facilitate learning. He's led workshops on civic engagement, participation, and leadership, as well as civil discourse and servant leadership in countries around the world, including Bangladesh, Benin, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Ethiopia, this is not his first trip, Indonesia, Myanmar, Niger, Ukraine, Rwanda, and Taiwan. We had such a successful visit with Brian his first time around that we asked him to come back. And with that, Brian, I'll hand it over to you, as well as the microphone. All right, please join me in giving Brian a warm welcome.
Thank you. And I hope my mic is live. I got a red light here. You think that? Pleasure to be here and to be back in Ethiopia, and I love every chance I have to come to Ethiopia. This is my fourth visit to the country, and so when I heard there was a chance to come back, I jumped on it right away. I want to share a little bit about myself and where I come from, because it's relevant to this idea of civic leadership. And then I want us to think through about how we get involved as ordinary citizens and the ways that we can get involved as well. And I want to hear some of your ideas about some problems that you would like to see solved in your local community or in this city or in this country. And we can talk about some of those ideas. But first, a little bit about where I'm from. This shifted over here at a point. I am in the state of North Carolina, which is actually hidden back there. Somehow that slide shifted. This is the state of North Carolina, and I'm up here in the northwestern part of the state. It's a very mountainous region. And in fact, the mountains very much define where I am. We are in what's called the Appalachian region of the United States. It begins down here in Alabama, Georgia, and extends all the way up through Pennsylvania. And very much it's defined by our geography. It's defined by the mountains that are Appalachia. And what's happened is that the residents of Appalachia, because of the mountains, face certain challenges. So it's very possible that there's a town inside one of the valleys of a mountain, and there's a town not that far away from that same village, not that far away in terms of how the bird flies, but it's very difficult from residents of one town to get to another, or one family member to get to another family, because they have to cross over the mountains. And additionally, transportation in this area is not that great. I am about an hour from the nearest highway, which means that it's not easy for goods to be shipped or sent. There's no navigable waterways there. So as a result, states like West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, Western North Carolina, Western Virginia have struggled because of this transportation in getting communication in and out, and for jobs to flourish there. So a distinct culture arose out of Appalachia, and some of it is stereotype and some of it is truth. People from Appalachia are sometimes made fun of by other Americans in other parts of the country. Appalachians are portrayed sometimes as, like this cartoon down here, as some sort of backwards, uneducated a person. We call that person a hillbilly. Someone from the Appalachian Mountains is called a hillbilly. And it's not a pleasant connotation, a barefoot person. And some of that is true. Sometimes there are people who live in Appalachia who might meet that stereotype. And it's true that some of the poverty that is at times made fun of in Appalachia certainly exists. Indeed, Appalachia has a harsh life for some people who live there. It's a coal mining area for much of Appalachia. Coal mining is a very difficult, dangerous job. And people who work in mining don't earn a lot of money. And sometimes they stay in poverty for generation after generation. Here's a picture of President Lyndon Johnson visiting a home in Appalachia because there was some widespread concern among the U.S. government about the residents of Appalachia. So he wanted to make sure he went and saw with his own eyes some of the issues that were taking place. And some of the environment is just harsh. There was a movie made about a resident of Appalachia, coal miner's daughter, about Loretta Lynn. She was a famous country music singer who came up out of extreme poverty in the Appalachian region of Kentucky to go on to be a successful singer. And that's promoted some of the mythology of what Appalachia is about. But there's some beautiful parts of Appalachia. There's a distinct music that comes out of the region that's known as bluegrass music and mountain music with distinct instruments. There's delicious food that's special that comes from that region, like this cornbread that's cooked in a pan. It's known from the Appalachian region, like these beautiful quilts or blankets. And these are old traditions that have been passed down in Appalachia over many generations through many families. It's also a beautiful natural environment. You can see how beautiful it is during all four seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. And the mountains each take a different look during each of those seasons. And so nowadays, people are happy to come to Appalachia and experience some of the remote nature that exists there. So my university is named after this region. And it was founded with the purpose of serving the people of the Appalachian region by providing first teachers and later other forms of professional education. So my university has had this strong commitment to our community that we hope that our graduates will be competent graduates that will go on to serve the Appalachian region and the wider state of North Carolina. So that's a big part of what I do. And I spend time talking with faculty and talking with students about what is that responsibility. I want my students at the university to be competent accountants and historians and physicists, but I want civically engaged accountants and historians and physicists, those students who can take their knowledge and give it back to the local community. So when I talk to Appalachian students and I ask them to think about the problems of the local community, and that's my invitation for you today, is you think about the problems of your local communities and your local neighborhoods, and in the city of Addis Ababa, how are problems going to be solved within your local communities? And I would suggest, unless we follow 4 steps, problems are going to continue. How stuff gets done, or how problems get solved. We have to first see the problem, we have to know what to do, we have to be willing to do something, and then we actually follow through. And I would suggest that unless we do these 4 steps, we are going to continue to be upset about problems that exist within our communities. And we will, years from now, be continuing to complain about problems in our neighborhood unless we do those 4 things. So I'm going to take each of these in a bit of detail. First, we see the problem. This is from Martin Luther King, who's one of our great leaders and inspirational civil rights leaders. He said, "I'm convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from one another." King wrote this after he got his PhD and he went to the city of Montgomery, Alabama in the Deep South. And he took a look around the city of Montgomery and he said, "You know, I've noticed something about Montgomery." He said, "There are 2 cities in Montgomery. One Montgomery is for white Americans and another Montgomery is for black Americans. And there are some interactions, sometimes on the street or in the workplace, typically where Black Americans serve the white Americans. But he said the critical places where people live and enjoy life, there are two cities of Montgomery. There are two Montgomerys in our educational system, two Montgomerys for our houses of worship, two Montgomerys for our social life. Black Americans and white Americans were not interacting, they weren't seeing each other, and as a result, King said the first step we have to do if we're going to move toward justice is to make sure that Black Americans and white Americans begin to see each other. We have to see problems and we have to see each other before we begin to solve problems. I use another similar illustration. This is the continental United States, and I live here in North Carolina now, but I spent the majority of my adult life down here in the state of Florida. It's the third most populous state, very diverse state, and I lived on the west coast of the state of Florida in this major metropolitan area of several million people, the Tampa Bay region. And I lived in the city of St. Petersburg, which is a very densely populated city. Now, the geography of the city is important for me to make my point, for us to talk about how we have to see the problem. The city of St. Petersburg was historically divided during the days of segregation, where it was divided by this street, Central Avenue, that ran east-west. And from the north to the north of Central Avenue lived white Americans. And to the south of Central Avenue resided Black Americans. And as a result of that historical segregation, even today, residents of the south side of St. Petersburg continue to have a number of challenging problems. The infant mortality rate is incredibly high on St. Petersburg. Almost 1 in 5 African American babies don't reach the age of 2. The graduation rate, there's problems with education. The graduation rate for African American residents on the south side of St. Petersburg. With the police in that region, these areas, it's very difficult to get groceries. In fact, if you live on the south side of St. Petersburg, you often have to take a bus and then make a transfer down. It takes about 90 minutes for you to reach a grocery if you don't have a car. And so this area struggles with a number of really challenging problems. Part of the city are some of the wealthiest city of St. Petersburg. There are huge out here on this side of the city, huge mansions, the sort you see in a movie video. The challenge is when they need to go downtown for work or whatever reason, they simply get on this elevated highway that runs right downtown, and they run right over the south side of St. Petersburg. The highway runs right over all these challenging problems that exist within the city. And as a result, the folks who live out here never see with their own eyes the challenges of education that exist on the south side of St. Petersburg. They never see with their own eyes the health disparities that exist in that city. They don't see with their own eyes some of the problems of crime and unemployment that exist in that part of the city. And so they don't see the problems that exist within their own city and their own community. And occasionally when they read about something in the newspaper about some crime that might exist or some unrest that exists there, the people who live out here say, I don't understand. I don't understand why these people are so unhappy who live in this great city of ours. Yeah, they say that because they don't see it with their own eyes. So I would say that if we want to solve problems, we have to see the problem in order for us to be able to address it. We have to try to decide where are our blinders that keep us from seeing the problems that exist within our own neighborhood. Sometimes we have to help others to see the problems that exist. So we have to see the problem, and then 2, we have to know what to do. I'm often very challenged about knowing what to do to solve a particular problem. Sometimes when someone comes up to me on the street and they ask me for money, I'm perplexed and I'm not quite sure what the right response is or what I should do in that circumstance. Should I give money to that person who's asking for it in the street? Maybe they are quite poor and quite hungry, and I don't want them to be poor and hungry. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if that's really the best response. If me giving them money is the best thing I can do, especially if it's a child, I don't know if I want to perpetuate that. So we have to know what to do. And this is the job of critically thinking citizens. We have to make some discernments about what's the best way to solve a problem. And sometimes that means seeking out experts in a given field, or talking with others in groups, maybe talking with people here at the American Center about what are some ways in which we can solve this problem in our neighborhood, some specific solutions to respond. Now I have a picture here of Plato's Republic, this book that was written in 380 BC, many centuries ago in ancient Greece. This book, I think, is one of the most important books ever written in the history of ideas. In Plato's Republic, he outlines some of the most fundamental questions about human existence. What is truth? What is justice? What is a well-ordered and functioning society? How do we treat those who are less fortunate than us? And in the middle of that important book, he puts forward a very important idea. It's called Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Imagine, Plato said, imagine that there is somewhere a deep and dark cave. And inside that cave are held prisoners, people who are held in chains. And these poor prisoners, they are stuck inside this cave their entire life. And not only are they chained in a way that these prisoners cannot get up, they can't walk around or move around, they can't turn around to see what's behind them. They can't even look to the right or the left to see who's around them. The only thing that these prisoners can do is look straight in front of them, straight in front of them. And what do they see? These prisoners, their entire lives, see nothing but these shadows on a wall. And these shadows are projected by a fire, or illuminated by a fire that illuminates these puppets, and it projects these shadows onto these walls. Now, Plato didn't answer questions of like, well, how do these prisoners eat? And how do they survive? He wasn't trying to, he said, this is just an illustration. These prisoners, their entire life, all they see is shadows. In time, they begin to think that those shadows are reality, that those shadows are what the truth, because they don't know what's behind them. So Plato said that these prisoners are just like you and me. That is, they're just like every human being that sometimes hears information that's not entirely accurate. So it's our job as thoughtful citizens to ask ourselves the question, how do I, in knowing what to do to respond, is what I'm being told, is it true, or is it a shadow on a wall? Because we hear shadows on the wall all the time. When we hear advertisement on the radio or see it on the TV, that could be true, but lots of time it's shadows on the wall. When we see stuff on our news feed on Facebook, sometimes those words are true, but very often it's shadows on the wall, and we have to be discerning about what it is that we're hearing. When we think about our tradition, and we think about, oh, this has always been done this way among my people or in my family. Now, is that truth, or is that shadows on the wall? So we need to be willing to ask ourselves some very tough and critical questions. And almost everything that we are told or that we read about, we should be examining those ideas with a critical framework and trying to decide whether those ideas are true or whether they're shadows on a wall. This is the job of discerning citizens. We know what to do. Imagine, Plato said, imagine if a prisoner, okay, so here are the prisoners down here, they're looking at shadows. These are the puppeteers, and here's the fire that illuminates the puppets. Imagine if a prisoner were able to escape up out of the cave, out of the darkness of the cave. They would see the real world for what it is for the first time. They would be truly illuminated in the daylight. And they would see the world for what it really is, not just shadows cast on the wall. So this is our job, is to seek people out who know what to do. We have a library here behind us full of all kinds of great resources that might be able to give us some solutions about what to do to solve some difficult problems that we see in society. Who can I seek out in my neighborhood who is wise, who might be able to help give me some ideas on how to solve some of the problems that exist within my neighborhood? And that's our job. 3, we're willing. And this can be our challenge as well. Imagine, Plato said, imagine if a prisoner were to come up out of the cave and for the first time be exposed to a very difficult and uncomfortable truth. Sometimes that truth would be so bright and so blinding and so unfamiliar that it would be a temptation for the prisoner just to close their eyes, put their hand over their eyes, and return back into the cave. Why? Well, because the cave is what's familiar. The cave is what I've been raised on. The cave is everything I know. The cave is where my family is. The cave is where my tribe is, my group is, my people are. They have one way of operating. So it's very uncomfortable, this truth that I'm having to contend with now. And so sometimes one of the challenges to our will is to be able to say, I'm going to do the right thing, what I think the right thing to do is in my neighborhood. Sometimes the challenge to our will is imposed on ourselves or by other people. Sometimes maybe we're a little bit like this creature. I don't even know what this thing is. It's pretty ugly, right? And so sometimes maybe we feel a little bit ugly too. And we say, you know, I'm not really worthy to solve this problem. And so we undercut our will in doing that. Sometimes we say, you know, well, where I come from, people who look like me don't speak up about these issues. Where I come from, women aren't the first ones to speak, so I'm going to be cautious about that. Where maybe I'm too young to address this problem, or I'm not quite knowledgeable enough, or I'm not quite powerful enough, or you know, I'm not a politician, so I really can't get anything done. And so then suddenly our will begins to erode to solve a number of these issues. Sometimes our will is eroded by other people. When we say, I'm going to make a difference in my community or my neighborhood, sometimes we don't get the support that we should. And people make fun of us. Why would you want to spend your time volunteering to make your neighborhood a better place? Why would you want to give up a Saturday morning that you have off when you could be out playing football or just relaxing at home or just doing something you like? Why would you do that when it should be somebody else that does this? And so sometimes people give us ideas and then our will again begins to erode. So we have to be willing to, we have to see the problem, we have to figure out what to do, and then we have to be willing and overcome some of those discouragements, either from internal, from inside, or from external sources. And then we actually follow through, and that's our last step, right? So sometimes we know what to do, we see the problem, we know what to do, maybe we're kind of willing, but geez, how do I make that first step? What's that first step that I need to do to go on and actually address this issue that's been bothering me for some time? We see the problem, we know what to do, we're willing to do something, and then we actually follow through. So what I'd like us to do now is spend a little bit of time thinking through these 4 questions. Think about among yourself, and I'm going to break you all into small groups, and I'm going to give the folks on Facebook Live a little bit of work to do in a second. But in just a second, I want us to spend just a few minutes talking with each other about a problem that bothers you in your neighborhood, in your community, in the city of Addis Ababa. Think about that. Share with others, either online or with your small group, a problem that you have seen. Who else needs to see that problem too? Who else needs to be exposed to that problem as well for you to be able to move forward? And how can you help them to see it? Thinking of your community problem, what will you how will you discern what to do? Who do you need to talk to know what to do to solve that problem? Maybe there's a wise person in your life who you can talk to, or someplace you can get answers. What are some things that could discourage you from acting? That's question 3. And 4, what's going to be your next step? So I'm very interested to hear what you might come up with. So what I'd like to do is each row act as a group and talk amongst yourselves just for about 10 minutes, okay? And begin to answer that question. Now from time to time I'll be talking, but I'm just going to be talking to the folks on Facebook and giving them some instructions on what to do. So right now, go ahead and take 10 minutes and begin to share with your group a problem that you are aware of. And I'm going to have a little conversation with the folks on Facebook Live, okay? So go ahead and have your conversation, please. For those of you who are on Facebook Live, I don't want you to feel left out. So we are addressing these 4 questions, and I'm hoping that you might take a few minutes to write down your answers, short answers to these questions. And then when you are done writing your 4 responses, go ahead and post those in the comments below and list them 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the simple instructions are, the first question is, think about a problem that you know of in your local community And who else needs to see that problem and become aware of that problem as well? Question 2 is for you to, how are you going to know what to do to solve that problem? Is there someone that you can talk to, maybe a wise person in your local community? Is there a place where you can find books or articles about this problem and how to solve it? Is there somebody who you think shares your interest and concern and passion that you might want to pair up with to discuss this problem, maybe over coffee or tea, and the two of you just want to sit and talk about the problem and come up with some solutions on how to solve that? And then 3 is, what are some things that sometimes might be a discouragement to you? Who might be the ones to tell you, you shouldn't spend your time doing that? Or what are some obstacles that you're going to have to overcome internally before you begin to address that problem? And then 4, and this is the big one, what's your next step? What is step number 4, the first step that you're going to do to begin to address this problem in your local neighborhood or your city? Okay, so spend a few minutes writing those things down, and then when you're ready, post them down below in the comments so everyone can see them. Okay, and I'll check back with you in just a second. Make sure you include this person, all right? All 4 of you. So if you're just joining on Facebook Live, the group here in... So if you're just joining on Facebook Live, the group here in the American Center are discussing among themselves problems that they are aware of in their community. And you're invited to do the same. Think about a problem that you know of in your local community. And then 2, what are some things, how will they know how to solve that problem? Is there a person to talk to or a resource to gather or an NGO to talk to solve that problem? 3 is, what are some discouragements that you might face as you think about addressing your local problems? And 4, what's that first step you're going to take? So the conversation is very interesting. People are talking about problems that they know of in their neighborhood, and they're coming up with solutions and their next steps that they're going to take to solve local problems here in Addis Ababa. But the same can be applied anywhere around the nation of Ethiopia, to be sure. So we're going to only talk in small groups for just a couple more minutes, and then we're going to reconvene, talk a little bit more, and you'll hear some of their ideas, and you can post your ideas in the comments below on the Facebook page. Feel free to join this group. We're just talking about local problems. Do you mind making sure she's included? So we only have about 4 minutes left, so 4 minutes left to conclude your conversation, so move quickly, okay? If you're watching on Facebook Live, we're having a small group discussion that's lasts about another 4 minutes, and then we're going to reconvene with the presentation. We're just finishing up a small group discussion, maybe 3 more minutes, and then we'll reconvene, okay? So just hang in there for 3 more minutes. We're having small group discussions. They're almost done, and then we'll reconvene. All right, 2 minutes, and then we reconvene. Folks on Facebook Live, I hope that you have followed this 4 steps of what's a problem that you see and who else needs to see this problem. 2, how will you know how to solve this problem? 3, what are some discouragements you may face? And 4, what will be your first step? And I hope that you're posting your thoughts to this in the comments below. Okay, folks, I'd like us to reconvene as a group, and I've just got a few more things that I would like to share about ways that we can respond, and then I want to hear your ideas and the things that are of concern to you here in your local communities. I'm very interested to hear what that may be. By the way, number 4, I just don't know. I think 4 might be the most important one that I want to hear. What is your next step? And I will say something I have to share. I was in Colombia not that long ago having the same discussion with some university students. And this one university student was very bothered by something at his school, and his next step, his first step was going to be, well, I'm going to wait for these administrators to do something about it. And I thought at the time, well, then the problem's not going to get solved. The question is what are you going to do? What is your response? Because if we wait and we wait and we wait for someone to solve this problem for us, guess what? We're going to be waiting for an awful long time, right? If we wait for the government to come along, if we wait for someone who's older to come along, So the answer I hope that you came up with is something that you are going to do to take responsibility. Now, before we share, just a couple of other ideas that I want to make sure that we get to. One is when we talk about responses, there are typically three kinds of ways in which we can respond to problems. One is social relief, one is social reform, and then the last one, according to Claire Bow, is social reconciliation. So social relief is where we address the symptoms of the underlying disease. The symptoms of the underlying disease and the immediate consequences of deep-rooted problems. So that when we see someone hungry on the street, social relief is when we go and feed them for the day, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely important. We should be helping people in the immediacy. But reform asks the question, why do we have hungry and poor people in our society in the first place? So relief is when we open up an abuse shelter for women who are battered and abused. But reform asks the question, why is it that women are treated in such a way in our society that we even have to have abuse shelters in the first place? So we should be asking ourselves, what are the root causes of the problems that we're trying to address? You know, there's a famous story about this remote mountainous village, and it was very difficult to get to, and the road was very dangerous, and it hugged the side of a mountain. It was very curvy and many switchbacks, very dangerous road to get to this mountain. And sometimes visitors, when they were on the way to the town, they would take a curve too fast, and they would go off the side of the road, and their car would plunge into the ravine, and the people would die. And so the town got together and said, well, what can we do to solve this problem? And the town said, I know what we'll do. We will create this region's best ambulance corps so that when these accidents happen, we can quickly get to these victims and get them under the care of a doctor. And that wasn't entirely a bad idea until someone raised their hand and said, well, wait a minute, why don't we build a guardrail? If we build a guardrail, the cars won't slip off the road in the first place. We don't need the ambulance corps. So reform asks the question, can we work at the root causes of some of the problems that exist? And then reconciliation is this idea of, what can I learn from those that I serve? What does someone with a disability have to teach me? What does someone of a different race, a different tribe, a different group, what do they have to teach me? What does a person who's blind have to teach me who has sight? And maybe I have many things to learn as I try to serve those who are blind. And then also reconciliation implies that we begin to integrate our concern for important issues like the ones you were discussing into your lifestyle. It becomes a part of your lifestyle, it becomes a part of your identity. Just a last couple of things here. We use this thing in my university because sometimes students come to me and they have one way of thinking about solving a problem in their community. And often it's charitable volunteerism, and that's a very good thing. But we want to help students to expand their thoughts on what are some other ways in which you can address some problems that are of concern to you. So yes, charitable volunteerism is great. We can spend a Saturday morning giving aid to a local NGO, a local nonprofit. We can volunteer our time. Absolutely, we should do that. But also, maybe we can engage in social entrepreneurship. So if I'm concerned about a low-income community, I can sell products, and that will help invest in that community. I can give some of the profits to a low-income community. I can engage in activism, protests and demonstrations, and I can make sure my voice is heard within the government and with corporations by waving a sign and engaging in protest. Community building is where I just try to bring people together, people who are different. And so instead of creating divisions, I'm trying to create unity, often among very different people or different groups. That's a very important thing that we can do. Philanthropy, how can I give money to NGOs and other people trying to do good? Community and economic development is where we say, I own a business and I want to start one of my new businesses in a low-income community so that jobs are created, so that wealth is generated and kept within that community. It's one way to solve poverty. Voting and formal political activities, that's where we engage in the democratic process and we make sure we are voting and we're educating others and helping others to vote. Informal associations, that's simply where we take care of each other, our neighbors, our friends, our family, those that we see. So where I live, it snows very often, and often quite a lot. This last December, we got almost 2 feet of snow. That's quite a bit of snow. And so during that time, we check on each other as neighbors, and we make sure our neighbors are safe and okay, make sure that they can get out if they need to during those times of snowstorms. That's informal associations. Socially responsible daily behavior, that's where we live lives of integrity that are compatible with the interests and concerns we have. So if I'm concerned about the environment and I want to go and clean up the environment, I also want to make sure that I don't pollute the environment myself. I'm living a daily, socially responsible daily behavior. Community-based participatory research, that's where academics and universities can help provide data to solve important social problems, help communities know what to do. Advocacy is where we speak up for those who don't have a voice, who's not in the room, who needs to be heard. Who is a group that is not represented here? Who is it who doesn't have a voice or doesn't have power, and I can speak up for that person? That's one way we can begin to solve social problems. Community organizing is where we draw people together and we say, help us to solve this problem, because we have this tradition within the United States that if we see a problem in the community, what can I do as an individual to address that problem? And if that problem's too big, maybe my family can help me to solve this problem. But if the problem's too big for me and my family, I turn to my neighbors, so I turn to my community and say, hey folks, what can we do about all this trash everywhere? Or what can we do to make sure our kids are safe? And so me and my family and my neighbors work together. But maybe the problem's too big, and then I turn to my civic and religious organizations, and then and only then do I turn to my local, state, and federal government. But first I try to work and solve these problems myself. Okay, so I'm interested in hearing some of the discussion that we had. Those are just a couple of ways in which we can respond, but I'm very interested to hear what some of the groups had to say, and I'll make sure that what you say, I'll repeat it for the folks who are on Facebook. So does any one of the groups want to share about a problem you discussed, and how are you going to know what to do? How are you going to overcome discouragements? And what's your very first step? So someone in this group, yes, y'all were having a lively conversation. What's something? Sanitation. Okay. Okay, so you see the problem of sanitation. Now, how are you going to know what to do to solve this issue of sanitation? Okay. Make sure that they're aware, make sure that other people see the problem too, right? Yeah, absolutely. Good.
So you also transfer the problem to congregation in church, mosque, and so forth.
Oh, so he mentioned share it with other groups that you know, your congregation at church and other groups that you have, share so that they can see the problem as well. Good.
Then after we start in a small scale from our house, and from the religious congregation.
Good. Good. That's very good. So he and maybe others in his group were concerned about this problem of sanitation. And so one of his ways, and I think it addresses almost all of these questions that we discussed, is who else needs to see this, right? And so if he were to go to his religious group and share with them his concern about this problem of sanitation, suddenly others are seeing it as well. And then they can work, and also maybe within that group there's some ideas and solutions about how do we know how to solve this problem and begin to work on next steps. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. How about another group? Who else? Yeah, what some things that you all were discussing?
There are a lot of problems in our society, starting from the first one. There is a transportation problem, electricity, the price of commodity, and unemployment. These are our problems.
Okay, so these are huge problems, right? Unemployment, transportation, the economy, and you all solved it in 10 minutes. All three of those. Okay, good though. So let's pick one of those. Let's pick one of those. Unemployment. Okay, that's a big problem, but good. No problem too big. How will you know what to do to address issue of unemployment in your community?
We have to discuss with our society or community by engaging in every things. We face these things in our everyday life. So we have to discuss to come to solve the problem.
Okay.
First, we have to aware all the societies and we have to discuss each other. Then I think there is a solution for the problem.
Okay, so there's something there, and you said something kind of interesting. I don't know if you meant to do it, but you almost said, we have to discuss this problem of unemployment everywhere, something along the lines of everywhere and with everyone, right? All the time. And maybe you're right. So when these big problems, no problem like this can be solved in 10 minutes. I was making a joke a second ago. These are big problems, but we do need to be talking about these things. I mean, maybe you need to be the person that every time you walk in the room, people say, oh, here's the gentleman, he's always talking about unemployment. Okay, I'm going to give him a listen now, and let's talk about some of these solutions together. And that's a little what I was talking about before, about where we integrate it into our lifestyle, right? Oh, he's the unemployment guy. He's the guy who's always talking about unemployment. Yeah, let's talk about this and some solutions, because between the two of us, or between the 30 of us here, we might begin to come up with some pretty good solutions for how we can address issues of unemployment. Unemployment. I've got unemployment in my community, but you know, there's also a person in my community who's really good at fixing cars. And there's another person there, she's really good at sewing. But they're unemployed. Maybe I can spread the word that this person, when my car breaks down, I go to him. And when I need something sewn, I go to her. And so, you know, I'm talking within my community and coming up with some solutions. So what's your first step? What's the answer to number 4? What will be your next step to move forward to follow through to address that community problem?
First, we have to be patient to solve the problem. Then we have to try to do new changes. Maybe it is being an entrepreneur.
Okay.
To solve the problem, which is unemployment. It means creating a new job for the unemployed employees.
Okay.
And accepting ideas of every society or community and having an open discussion area to solve the problem.
Okay.
This is our next step to solve the problem.
Well, I hope that you do that. So he said to have an open discussion and keep an open mind. Keep an open mind about new ideas, absolutely, and collaborative. So I do hope that's your next step. Have a conversation with as many people as possible. Let's not leave here tonight and we won't talk about this stuff anymore, but let's have further conversations about this issue. Good. Let me hear a few others. What are some other things that you all were discussing? Yeah.
Yeah, we're discussing about traffic problem.
Traffic, okay.
We are always observing traffic problem and claiming the type of unemployment in every day.
Okay.
So we should have to inform this problem for people's pedestrian driver and traffic police. Working with volunteer in the street and encouraging people to walk probably short distance rather than using cars for always.
Okay.
Strategy.
Okay.
Plus, working with the government authorities and those who have right enforce all the regulations, road authorities, road management officers.
Okay. Okay.
In addition to that, the final bottom line is education and training. Educating people about the consequences of traffic problems.
Okay.
That will be
Sure. So this gentleman is concerned about traffic issues and especially some danger issues that that are associated with that. So one is to how to inform the Ministry of Transportation and those who are responsible to encourage safe driving, but also to educate others, perhaps to encourage people to walk more, but also about ways to drive safely. Absolutely. And I think associations can be formed. We have in the United States, different groups that have been related to transportation. Some of those started small, like there was a group called MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, and it was founded by a woman who sadly lost her, I think, daughter to a drunk driver. And so she started with a small group of people, and she said, I'm mad. I want to talk with other mothers who have lost children to drunk drivers. And the group started very small and very locally, just within her neighborhood or her town or her community. Let's come together and let's talk about this problem we have about drunk drivers. This is happening too much. This is in the 1970s. And eventually that movement began to grow and grow and grow and grow till it became a nationwide problem. And even more importantly, drunk driving became a terrible stigma in the US. It used to be a fairly common problem in the US, but starting in the late 1970s and through the 1980s, there was a widespread work by the work of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, to address this issue. But remember, she started small, okay? So as we think about these issues, maybe we want to think in front of our own neighborhood. How can I make my street safer? And maybe what I can do is call upon my family and my neighbors to think about how safe is my road. Because yes, I would love to make all the roads in Addis Ababa safe, but probably that's a lot to bite off and chew. But maybe my neighbors can get together and keep an eye out of drivers and sort of do a community watch. Or maybe they can post signs if it's legal to do that, to say, slow down, there are children around here, just to remind drivers that they're nearby. Maybe a group of neighbors can come together with some kind of strength and go to the local government and say, hey, we need speed bumps, or we need some better signage in our community. So sometimes it's good just to focus on, what's in front of my house, and then we start small and we go big, just like that Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. But that's great. Good. A few more. Okay. So what's the problem that you have seen and you would like others to see?
Yeah, that we Ethiopian people, we have like some big problems to give our knowledge or teaching and stuff
Mm-hmm.
kids. So we need to take this one of our cultures to volunteering for people.
Okay.
For example, if I have a teaching skills, I need to give these skills for others. I
Sure.
need to share.
Yeah.
But I've been, when I was in school, I had a volunteering, and I know that's the feeling you get satisfactions when you share what you have for people.
That's very good. So if I'm understanding you right, the problem that you're thinking about is education of children, right? And you kind of already know that the solution is, well, I need to spend time teaching these kids if they are undereducated. So let's talk. I'm very interested in number 3 for you. What if you were to engage in that on a voluntary basis? What might be some discouragements that you could face?
We need to organize in our country to fundraising.
So you need resources, right? That's a discouragement. How do we overcome that?
And some tax opportunities.
Okay.
So maybe if I want to do this, I need to aware my friends or my family first, and then throughout the publics on the streets, maybe for
Right.
people in Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's good. And maybe you can anticipate some discouragements. I don't know if your family and friends are going to be supportive, but maybe we can anticipate some discouragements that they may give you and get them on your side and help them to not become an enemy of your idea, but an ally of your idea, and to encourage you in what you're trying to do in educating young people. Very good. Let's have just a few more. Yeah. What's a problem that you were discussing? It really troubles you.
The same problem.
Oh, okay.
And on what he said, I think the main problem in volunteerism in Ethiopia is we don't have the culture of philanthropy and giving back to the community. We are very social and we live very close by, but the idea of philanthropy is have many barriers in Ethiopia, and one of the barriers that takes the lion's share in Ethiopia is the ethnicity question. This ethnicity question, as you may know, is one of the biggest hurdle for the now democratic reform that's going on right now.
Okay.
And this ethnicity problem is one that could possibly be solved by volunteerism and other solutions like this. But this problem, however, is getting worse and worse because it's left unchecked, or we are focusing on the wrong areas, or even aggravating.
Okay.
Sometimes.
So thinking about that, how will you know what to do then? If you're concerned about this problem of philanthropy and how it's not embedded in the culture, how do we come up with a solution for that? Who would you talk to find an answer for how to fix that?
I think on this answer, there done a lot of research and other studies, but what we came up with, we think other foreign organizations like this one, and we need to establish our own. The main solution would be we need to establish our own organizations. It could be civil society organizations or other NGOs.
Okay.
But to skip on the next problem, some possible things that might discourage us from establishing this. Ethiopia doesn't have the legal or the infrastructure frameworks to implement such kind of reforms.
Okay.
For example, the Ethiopian Charitable and Societies Proclamation is one of the main criticized laws in Ethiopia, like thanks to the anti-terrorism proclamation, which prohibits foreign NGOs and civil society organizations from investing and creating such kind of organizations in Ethiopia. And I think this might needs to change on a bigger level from besides what could individually offer.
Okay. Yeah, so for those who couldn't hear, there's this interest in developing a culture of philanthropy. And how do we do that? And you said something I think really important, whether you noticed it or not, but you said, you know, well, we can work together to solve these problems. I don't need to go talk to an expert. I would bet within this room, if we had a wider discussion of how do we change the culture to promote philanthropy in the nation of Ethiopia, I bet there would be some amazing ideas that come up in a very small environment, a small environment such as this, right? So we don't always need to go to some academic, and we don't need to go to a book necessarily. We can be pretty good at coming up with solutions. But then there was this need for the wider infrastructure. And yeah, let's take one step at a time, right? Let's do small and begin to talk with each other and say, well, what can I do in my local community? And then once that becomes a movement and people see that we're successful, maybe that can move to the wider community. Okay, I want to hear one other problem that you discussed and oh, something on Facebook? Oh, here in the back here. Yeah.
The time is not that we go through all the steps, but I thought it would be important that group has said it already. This group also identified joblessness or unemployment as a problem. So,
unemployment is a problem.
Yeah, so there is some important issue. That's why I repeated. So as one of the issues that we identified is we want people, the community themselves, the young people who are coming out of universities each year, the government, and the other stakeholders. We know that would be good if they create awareness on the issue itself.
Okay.
That's another one thing. The other thing is we also thought that, including the young people, the graduates, we thought every citizen can be part of the solution. You know, in this country, there's a trend of looking out for government for each and everything. Government is the largest employer, the supreme solution giver for all the problems we have. But that's only our perception.
Yeah.
Government cannot be solution for everything.
Right.
We have local solutions for some of our local problems.
Yeah.
So we thought that raising awareness of the target group, the neighborhoods, communities, regardless of how big or small they are, will be important.
Very good.
So for that, one of our barriers we thought in going forward is one is resource, but even the resources needed to access medias.
Okay.
If voluntary media can be obtained, even that can be done without resources. So
okay.
We just thought some voluntary media organizations that can give some airtime for free.
Okay.
We think will help to solve the problem.
Okay.
So the issue, part of that solution, discussion on the solution is that all of the graduates almost from all corners of the country come to Addis. So there is high pressure on Addis.
Okay.
That has even created other social development challenge or pressures on the nation.
Okay.
So we thought it would be good to demobilize this barrier from Addis to all parts of the country.
Okay.
So that even can be achieved through awareness creation. That people can start small from their neighborhood. There can be a solution for their own problem. So one step at a time, by themselves and from their neighbors, we think that they can solve that problem.
Okay.
But so for all the root cause for all these problems, we think is awareness.
Yeah.
Lack of awareness or weak awareness.
Right. So that is, you're right. That's the beginning of the beginning of the solution, right? We have to see the problem. We have to help others to see the problem. And so your focus on communication is really key. And I do like what you say. It's like, we're in this habit of expecting the government. And I think that's the whole point, is how can we as everyday citizens take responsibility and say, I am going to be the one that's going to attempt to try to address even this really big issue. And I'm going to start local. And then I'm going to, there's that expression, think globally, but act locally. So I'm concerned about the wider part of Ethiopia, but I'm going to work within my neighborhood, in my building where I live, in my workplace or in my school to begin to address this issue. And the school is a very good place to start. So I work with university students, and sometimes university students are like, oh, we want to change the world. We want to fix America. We want to solve the problems of the world. And that's great. Start here. Start at this university. Think about what you can do at this university to address this very issue that's of concern to you. And let's start small. But exactly what you say in terms of raising awareness and seeing each other and seeing the responses or the solutions is exactly right. So I'm going to sort of close here with 3 ideas. And one is the ideas I would suggest that our civic life begins often with something like this. It's just a circle of people talking and listening to one another, trying to see one another and see what the answers, try to come up with solutions to those problems are. And I hope that you continue that. Anything that you discuss in just our brief time, find somebody to talk to about this issue, either here or over coffee somewhere or in your home. We are learning that a standard of social ethics is not attained by traveling a sequestered byway, but by mixing on the thronged and common road where all must turn out for one another and at least see the size of one another's burdens. So Jane Addams worked in the 19th to the 20th century in Chicago, and she was working with prostitutes and with recent migrants and from children who were living on the street, and she brought them to the Whole House. And then she invited professors from the University of Chicago and University of Illinois, and she brought the most preeminent scholars of the day to come together and have conversations with the residents there at the Whole House. And so people were beginning to see one another and also talk with people who might have solutions. It was the beginning. And so this is what she's saying, is we can't live our lives in private on some quiet road, but we've got to go into the common road, the crowded road, and at least look at each other and see what are the challenges that we're each dealing with. This is the first step. Sawubona is a Southern African term that simply means I see you. And from what I understand, as you were walking down the street, whether it be your relative or someone you know intimately, or whether it be a stranger, you might greet them with this word, Sawubona, I see you. I acknowledge who you are. I acknowledge your humanity. And as I see you, I want to begin to understand you, to see what your concerns and burdens and problems are, and maybe then we can work together in community. These are the beginning foundations of civic responsibility and civic life. I sure have enjoyed hearing you all and hearing some of the concerns that you have. You wouldn't be here tonight if you didn't want to make your community better. And I would suggest that those on Facebook are the same thing. They wouldn't be tuning in.
They have questions or solutions.
They have, oh yeah, maybe we should turn to a couple. I'm not sure if do we have time?
Yeah, we do. If you, we can close here, and then you can close the camera and answer the questions.
Yeah, that's absolutely.
From here, or you want to read it along here and save a few comments for you to screenshot.
Okay, so yeah, that's my final thought. And then let's, as we still have a little bit of time, I was conscious of that. Let's see what some folks on Facebook, if you got a good one, Ivana, to share.
Well, we have if you go from here and read the names.
Okay.
And these are the 3.
Okay.
So,
Oh my gosh, I wish I had my reading glasses. Okay.
You are mine?
Why don't you read for me? Well, you need a mic. Yeah.
Sorry, Professor, for this inconvenience. Very quick. So, Lema Baisa
on our Facebook follower wants to say, my personal advice to Ethiopian group is continue respect each other, don't be cheated by these problem creators among community, and continue managing life as usual, existing long experiences.
I like that, right? So let's not be encouraged by those who want to spread negativity, but maybe, yeah, we need to surround ourselves with those who have positive ideas. Because as I said before, just like that ugly creature coming out, there'll be plenty of people, sometimes the people who would discourage us, you know, there's that expression, we hurt the ones we love the most. Sometimes those in our community are those in our friends and family who don't always encourage us. Focus on the negative stuff, but the positive stuff. You got another one?
Yeah, here's one. Sorry. So Abiot Dejene says, in our context, we don't need countless solutions, but there are many people working hard to get a problem to our solutions. How can we challenge this? Get our people understand and take its share and act now. What would be your advice?
Well, I think that's great. I don't think that we need to reinvent the wheel, right? So I absolutely think we ought to think about solutions in our communities, but there's a very good possibility that there's already somebody out there doing it. And so maybe in terms of knowing what to do is that we immediately connect with someone who says, not only do I know what to do, but I'm already doing it. So come join me and let's join forces because they need energy. So we don't need to invent the solutions to these problems each time. Absolutely. So I agree with what that commenter says. Okay. Should we take comments, or do we have time for just one or two comments from here in the group? Does anybody have a comment or thought beyond what they want to share? I'm not talking about sharing another problem. I mean just some wider discussion of what we've been discussing. Oh yeah, Mandela Fellow. Where were you? Where did you do your fellowship? Oh, Lehigh. Yeah. Pennsylvania. Very good. That's a public administration there, right? Is it public administration that? Oh, entrepreneurship. Okay. Yeah. So what's your thought?
It's just a question. You frame, solution in terms of problems, right? You have a problem and trying to find a solution. The alternative way, I believe, is looking at opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm.
Why should you always be looking at problems?
Yeah.
And also see the other way, flip the coin and see the opportunity on
Yeah.
that side.
Yeah, so he says, for those who couldn't hear, it's like, well, we don't always need to focus on problems. Let's be looking at positive things. And there's a way of doing that kind of development called asset-based community development. I alluded to it just a second ago. Sometimes when we look at neighborhoods or communities, we say, oh, that's a terrible neighborhood. Nothing good ever happens there. And I talk with students about, think about in our cities, think about the inner city. What words come to mind? And students will say all kinds of things. Oh, poverty and crime and terrible roads and all these other problems. And then it's interesting that the things that our students are saying are very negative things. And they never think to say, well, what are the positive things about that supposedly bad neighborhood? And suddenly, if we begin to think about it, if we know the neighborhood, as I mentioned before, oh, hey, there's a very talented person there who's really good with their hands. They can fix cars. They've got some talents. There's a woman there who can sew, or there's somebody there who's good at this or that. Oh, in that neighborhood, there's a neat little place where people can gather. So, yeah, absolutely. Looking at assets and looking at positive things is absolutely a step that we can take and way to approach things. Very good. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think you tell us about the experience of your university around the collection. What are the tips?
Pardon me?
And none of the tips for the success of your university, working in the community around.
What are the tips for working in our community?
Yeah. The second thing is, I think civic engagement requires civic mindedness. How do we develop civic mindedness in our community?
Okay. Good. So his comment or question is, what are the tips to have our university work with the community, and how do we develop civic mindedness? I would say just very briefly, the way that we do it, first of all, and we should always do that, is listen to the community. What we don't want to do as a university is say, well, you better listen to us. We are this hotshot university with all these educated professors and students, and so we're here to solve all your problems. No. The way that we solve and work with the community is to listen to the community and say, what are their concerns? What would they like to see happen? And how can we levy or leverage the resources of the university to address those issues? So that's it, is the main thing. The other thing we do is we recognize it as the part of the educational experience. So it's not just that the university wants to go out and do good in the local community, which we do, but we also want to educate our students. So how can I learn chemistry? How can I learn accounting? How can I learn these various subjects by being engaged in the community? So instead of just spending the entirety of our time in the library with books and talking in classrooms, we're actually going out into the community and benefit. The other question is, how can we foster a sense of civic mindedness? You know, there's this sense, I give another talk on servant leadership, and how can we be the kind of leader that wants to serve others? It's such a temptation to want to be first. Martin Luther King has a famous sermon called The Drum Major Instinct, in which he says, boy, it sure is the temptation to want to be first, and to want to be famous, and to want to be prominent. But King said very famously, you know, when I die, please don't say that I got a PhD. Please don't say that I won the Nobel Peace Prize. Please don't say that I was recognized by all these organizations in society. Simply say that I was one who wanted to serve. So I think that's one of the fundamental aspects of servant leadership, is how can we get ourselves into a mindset of helping others first. Now here's the crazy thing about that, is when we get into a mindset of helping others and serving others, in a paradoxical way, we often benefit. If I'm worried about others who are in my care and they are successful, I in turn become successful. And so I think a little bit of that shifting our mindset is, how can we think with everything that we do, instead of trying to amass things and attention for ourselves, how can we help others to gain those things? And a nice little byproduct is that we'll be successful as well. Okay? Maybe time for one other question, and then we can conclude. Go ahead.